Hello, welcome back to After Effects tutorials. This one will be about creating pre-compositions or pre-comps for short and importing Photoshop elements or simply Photoshop files into After Effects. So let's get to it. Now I have a very similar file, almost the same file with the previous Parallax animation, but as you can see, instead of using PNGs, directly images as separate parallaxing elements, I am now using other compositions inside a bigger main composition, let's say. This is called pre-comping or nesting compositions, basically. So what you do here is you work on a composition first, and then you put it inside another composition to behave as a layer. But once again, any animation on that previous composition will be intact. So it will be rendered first and then rendered again as a separate element inside the main composition. I'm going to teach you all about it, don't worry. And the good thing about these compositions in particular is that they have been imported as Photoshop files, PSD files. And once you put a PSD file inside After Effects, it is going to turn it into a composition, basically. Okay, so let's check out Photoshop side first, see what's going on over there. Previously, these let's say Photoshop files were not Photoshop files. They were simply PNGs painted by Efoja, and using them as references, I repainted them using a bunch of brushes in a particular style, whatever, doesn't matter. And I've separated them into layers so I can control each element individually, both inside Photoshop and, if necessary, inside After Effects too, because these layers will be inherited as layers once again inside After Effects. So this is the foreground element. It's about 5,000 pixels wide. Good, that's completely fine. We are happy with the result. We have the telephone poles, we have the wires, we have shadow for telephone poles, we have bunch of weeds and shadows for weeds, and then pebbles on the ground, and then the dirt ground layer. The background is missing, obviously, it is transparent, so we can see the midground from underneath. Now midground is slightly larger than necessary right now. I mean, this could be considerably smaller because the more you put it in the back, the less resolution you're going to require, essentially, right? Because it is going to travel less, and once you blow it up to an appropriate size, scale it up as you do with parallax layers in the background, it is going to essentially come to at max the original size of your canvas. So it doesn't have to be super large. So this thing slightly has more layers. We have the ground, obviously, but then we have two trees, and the trees themselves can be further separated into compositions to be replicated as instances in this particular layer, in this particular parallax layer, let's say. And also I'm going to show that as well. So we have the tree trunk, we have a static layer for leaves, and then there's another layer which I want to animate for giving some life, giving some wind effects to this tree, and then there is a shadow on the ground. And the same is true for the second tree as well, but instead of an animated greenery, I'm going to simply use the first one, this one as well, okay, on the second tree as well, okay, because nobody is going to realize, better save time, right? All right, then in addition to that, I have a very simple bush here, okay, and a shadow for it. And once again, these are all separate layers. These are all individual layers. And once you isolate one of them, like, let's isolate this, nothing else is in this layer, okay? Because if I want to replicate this element over and over again, or if I want to replicate the accompanying parts as well, such as the shadow, I want this element to be as small and isolated as much as possible. If I want a second bush, ideally, I want to separate it as well. It's the same way I did it for the trees, because then I can control them, control their animations and positions individually much more easily. Okay. So yeah, and besides, I have a group here which is right now disabled, and let me show you what the group is. This is the ground layer, right? Well, this group is exactly the same thing, only the ground details are separated into a bunch of layers, and this was by choice. I simply duplicated this group, merged the group into a single layer and decided to keep that as my element, because I don't need to go in After Effects and control all of the color variations on these layers separately. At least I don't think I will be doing that. So instead of complicating the composition inside After Effects, I want to solve my problems over here in Photoshop. But it will be up to you. The number of layers and how many of them are merged and transferred or not transferred into After Effects is completely your decision. But know that once you import some stuff into After Effects, like this ground group, let's say, even if it's disabled, it will still be inside After Effects. Once again, it will be disabled, but you can enable it if you want, or you can delete it if you don't need it. Okay, and underneath I have my reference layer, which was a Foja's drawing. Then I created an additional parallax element, this very simple, very rudimentary basic drawing to go in between my midground layer and my background layer. Okay, so there's a forest, there's a ground, that's it. Okay, this is a new layer. It's about 3000 pixels wide, and it's about like 500, almost 600 pixels tall. Like I said, the further background you go, the less of an image you're going to require. Obviously, I can cut this down because it is going to be sandwiched between layers, so I don't need to have lots of space here. I don't need to have lots of space over there. But for the background, I need space because I want to position it. In positioning it, I want to have some leeway. I want to have some opportunities to push it upwards or downwards or whatever. So I made it slightly bigger, but it's about 2000 pixels wide, 1000 pixel tall. Okay, so once again, the background layer has the reference. This was the original drawing, but I increased its size, the canvas size. Okay, then we have a forest here, bunch of details on the mountains themselves, and in the background we have clouds, the sky itself, which is nothing more than a gradient, right? And then we have a moon, which is just a painting, a circular painting, and there are distant clouds as well. Nothing too detailed. And once again, this is not supposed to be the final version. I can add much more details to it. I can fine tune it. This is sort of like a painterly style, but by no means is it complete. But anyway, it is the middle ground. It is the middle stage between the initial sketching and the finalized version of everything. Okay, so these things are also separated into layers, and all of these files are saved as PSD files. Now, once we get into After Effects, as you can see, I have a camera animation here set up for 6 seconds. We're going to ask you to do 10 seconds, probably in each direction. Anyway, so you're going to have at least 20 seconds of animation. Please no more than that. Also, please don't make it too fast, right? But we'll get to those details eventually. Now, I have a camera animation here, a background, a midground 2 this time, and again, foreground. Okay? So that's about it, really. Let's watch the animation, and let me turn off 2 views, and let me just fit this up. Okay, and let me reposition my recording apparatus, and let's go. So this is basically it right now. Okay, but we can do so much more here, and that's what I wanted to show you in the first place. So I'm going to simply save this file, okay, and create a new file. Let's start a new, okay, and let me save this immediately. Okay, so this is Precomps. Let's make this Precomps 2. Okay, I mean, you can use the original file as well, and that's relatively easy, and I'm going to show you a bunch of tricks about it. So for example, we had a bunch of layers like parallax background, midground, and foreground, so let's call them in. Okay, let's create a new folder. Okay, original, let's not call it original, let's call it parallax assets once again. Okay, let's put these inside. Nice. And I want to create a new composition. It's going to be main comp parallax. Okay, 1920 by 1080 square pixels with 24 frame rate. 10 seconds long is good enough for now. Hit OK. Right, so let's push this in. Let's create a new camera, and this camera will be like focal length this time. Let's make it 50 millimeters. Okay, that's good. Hit OK. Yeah, we know, once per session. All right, so I'm going to make everything 3D, okay? And then I'm going to adjust their positions correctly, okay? Let's go to two views again, okay? Leaving foreground just in place, okay? Let's push the midground about here. Let's push the background about, I don't know, there, all right? So basically, that's what we do with parallax animation. I'm going to reposition my camera all the way to the beginning of the foreground layer. So let's push the camera towards here. Okay, beyond that is empty space. As you can see, you can track the frame of the foreground, right? Okay, while we're at it, you can just keyframe an animation for 6 seconds. Let's go to the other side. I can even track the position of this thing from over here. Okay, let's make sure it doesn't stick out. Okay, that's good. All right, so now the rest can be adjusted in terms of their scales. And let's enlarge this a bit, and let's enlarge it way more. Okay, so now there's our parallax animation. Of course, there are many things to fine adjust, but this is a good place to begin as any. Skip tour, please. I know how to use After Effects. Okay, so now we have to import our PSD elements. All right, and once you're importing them, first of all, import them one by one. Don't just grab all of them at the same time. And let's start with the foreground element. Okay, when I push this in, it's going to turn on, it's going to come up with a dialog box, and in this dialog box you have a bunch of things to select. For example, what are we importing? Are we importing this as a footage? If you are going to import this as a footage, it's going to just come as a single element. It's going to come as a single layer. Imagine saving as your Photoshop file as a JPEG. That's essentially what importing this file as a footage means. The last settings, the last position of every layer, their blending modes, their opacities, whether or not they're visible, all of these things will be considered. This whole file will be, merged down into a single image, and that image is going to act as a layer, act as a footage inside your After Effects file. That's what footage means. Now, composition and composition retain layer sizes will turn this Photoshop file into an After Effects composition, basically keeping all of the layers intact as editable elements. But retain layer sizes does something differently, and let me show you what the difference is. Once you import it as a composition and with editable layer styles, we're not merging the layer styles, and if you're wondering what layer style is, like these glow elements or dropping a shadow and that sort of deal, like putting a stroke on things, those are layer styles. And if you want to keep them editable, just hit editable layer styles. But once you import it simply as a composition, literally every layer inside this composition will be the same size. So parallax foreground, as you can see, came here as a composition, and All of the accompanying layers referencing the original Photoshop file is listed under a new folder. This is done automatically. You don't have to do this. After Effects does this automatically. Okay, and Parallax foreground element can be opened up here. And as you can see, it is a composition about the same size, 5,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels, because that was our canvas size for the foreground element. Okay, 5,000 by 1,000. And you might be asking, okay, but where does the frame rate come from, and who decides the length of this composition to be 10 seconds? Well, the last settings as you were building a composition, as you were creating a new composition, will be inherited. The last time we have created a composition in this project was this composition, main comp Parallax, and we set it to 24 frames per second and to be 10 seconds long. So same settings will be applied as this composition will be automatically generated. Okay, if I were to create a new composition like 30 frames per second and 20 seconds long, the next time I'm going to import a PSD file, After Effects is going to make it into a 20-second long composition with a 30-second frame base. Okay, so the last settings will be inherited because Photoshop files cannot carry that kind of data, so After Effects will have to make stuff up on its own. So Parallax foreground is a composition, and here we go, bunch of layers. The same layers that we have set up in Photoshop in the first place. We have poles, pole shadow, wires, weed shadow, pebbles, and ground. Okay, that's it. Now I can basically import this and change it with the foreground element. So, but before I do that, I was going to explain what layer sizes were. So if you take a look at every layer, right? And you can do that over here when you turn on this folder and take a look. Every layer is 5,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels, the same size as the canvas in Photoshop and the same size of the composition in After Effects. Okay, so I'm going to delete this with the layers and everything, and it's going to freak out. Oh, you want to try to delete elements that you are using inside compositions? Yeah, I know. Okay, so I'm going to import it again, but this time I'm going to retain the layer sizes. Okay, so once I open this up and take a look at the elements over here in the project folder, take a look, 5,000 by 358, 5,248. This is 3,953 by 472. You get the idea. I mean, some of them will be even smaller. And how small these things will be, think of them as the bounding boxes of these elements. How much area they actually cover, how much space they actually cover inside the canvas will be the basis of this retaining layer size business. Okay, so the good thing about this is that once you start importing elements, like take a look at the midground, like this, remember this bush, okay, I'll turn off the ground as well. Well, this is a very small object, right? And once we start putting animation on top of it or effects on top of it, we want those effects and animations and whatever distortions we might be animating on top of it to affect only this much of an area, because the rest will be wholly empty and unnecessary. And I want the pivot position to be closely situated right around where this object is supposed to be, not over here in the middle of the canvas somewhere. Okay, so that's why retaining layer sizes is important, and that effect can be observed once we start importing other Photoshop files. So let's do exactly that and import midground as well by retaining the layer size with editable layer styles. Okay, let's turn it on, and once you select, for example, the bush base, as you can see, it is no longer 6,000 by 1090. All of these layers have their itty-bitty sizes compared to what information, what rasterized information, what pixel information is available in the original layer. But do be careful about this. Like, for example, if I were to go ahead and paint something over here, obviously it is going to consider the entire area, because even though the space between them is empty, like if I go into bush base and just get a brush and paint something over here, okay, and save this file, once I go over here, there you go, everything is freaking out. Why? Because it has updated. The file is now updated, and the bush 1 base, let's find the bush 1 base, okay, is about this size now, because at one end of it is this bush and the other end of it is this dark gray smudge or black smudge. Okay, so be careful about your layers and what you put inside your layers, because it's going to matter. So let's reset this situation. Let's delete this, save it again. It's going to update and be situated in its correct position again. Okay, now with this out of the way, let's do the type thing so everything is in order. So let me bring in midground 2 as well, and let me bring in background as well. Retain layer size. Okay, now with this out of the way, we can do a very simple thing. Now remember the main Chrome parallax and these PNGs, well, you can change them. Imagine that you have set up this system, you are happy with the placement of everything in 3D space, their scales, everything, okay? And you want to quickly change it with something else. Click on the layer first, over here, like say parallax background, okay? And then go over here, select the parallax background from over here as well, left click drag while holding the Alt button, and it's going to change it with whatever is selected here. Okay, select midground, go to your midground, Alt click and hold, and left click with your mouse and drag. Okay, same for the foreground, Alt click and hold, find the foreground, drag it and release. Okay, that's it. Now everything is changed, right? But we are keeping the same settings. Whatever transition properties, whatever transform properties were here in the first place for the original layer will be inherited by the new layer. Obviously this works best when the original file was the same size as the new file, and if those sizes are different, as in the case with the parallax background element, as you can see it is slightly longer, the new settings or the previous settings might not work. Okay, so in this case I can make this slightly smaller. Okay, so that's the idea. Now I want to also introduce my midground 2 layer. If you remember, I'm going to put it over here, make it 3D. Okay, then obviously this is going to go in between the midground and background. Right, let's scale this up, see what's what. Okay, some like this. And I'm going to also reposition everything as much as possible, like background could be slightly up, midground iki or 2, midground 2 could be slightly up, midground about here is good, and foreground element about here is good. Or maybe let's reposition everything again. All right, much better, much better. Okay, let's save this, Control S to save, and let's watch everything. Very good, everything is fine and dandy. Okay, so what should you know about nesting compositions? First of all, the length of compositions are very important. So when you go into foreground, midground 2, background, you will realize that since everything was opened after, opening up the main Chrome parallax, everything is 10 seconds because that was the last setting used. Yeah. So if I want to, for example, go back into main Chrome parallax and say, okay, I need more space here, I need more time, I need 20 seconds. Okay. Now, those things will not update and they will be capped. Obviously, camera is an element, a dynamic element, and it could be this time of it can be stretched to however many seconds you wish, however many hours and days you wish. Okay, but the compositions themselves, they are at their final lengths. So if you want to stretch your time or increase the length of your time in a composition, in a main composition, know that you will have to do the same for all precomps inside of it as well. So when you go into foreground, it is only 10 seconds. You will have to increase its size and stretch these layers as well. That is the reality of After Effects. Time is everything in here. Okay, so make sure you're aware of this situation. Don't be surprised when you cannot further extend these compositions, because yeah, the only way to do that is if you go into composition settings and say, okay, this is now going to be 20 seconds. Okay, same as this, same as this, and same as this. Then you will have to go inside these compositions and actually select all the layers and stretch them as well. Okay, since these are images, they can have infinite sizes. Okay, but take a look. Remember that ground group that we didn't use? It came in as its separate composition. Now I can delete it because I'm never going to dabble around with the group elements of this ground. I don't care about these. They don't have to mean anything to me over in After Effects, so I'm going to just delete them. Okay, but I still have to go into all other parallax elements and increase the length of these layers inside them as well. So let's go to background as well and do the same. Okay. What you should also know is that you can create compositions while inside other compositions by selecting the elements and pre-comping them. That is called pre-composition. But once again, just as a reminder, a pre-composition and a main composition are only different in name. There is nothing that makes something a pre-comp by design, by selecting an option or anything. Once you put a composition inside another composition, that the previous composition becomes a pre-comp, basically. But in reality, it is no different than anything else. It is just a regular composition. There are not any different types of compositions by design. Okay, it is just a term. All right, so you can create pre-comps inside other compositions, which is the fundamental idea of using After Effects. Because if I go to my midground, what I have here is a bunch of trees, right? But I only made 2 trees. I want to populate this area with more trees, and not only that, I want to put animation on top of these trees so they become more lively. If I have to do it over and over again by duplicating these layers, it's going to take a really long time. It is going to be wholly unnecessary, and if I want to make a change on one animation, then I will have to go on and make other changes on other animations as well, and I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to come in and say, okay, this is a separate composition which can be duplicated inside this parallax midground element. Okay, so what I'm going to do is grab these tree 1 elements, all of them, right click and hit pre-compose. Okay, so this will automatically generate a new composition, put these selected layers inside of it, and place that newly made composition as a layer inside your existing composition. Okay, and while doing this, you will only have one option, like move all attributes into new composition. The reason why this thing is forcibly selected is that you are trying to get multiple layers into one composition. If I were to select just single layer, just one layer, and hit pre-compose, I also have the option to leave all attributes in parallax midground. What this means is that if you leave all attributes in parallax midground, as explained here, all effects and properties of what this layer had will be inherited by the new composition as it exists inside here. Okay, but if you move all of them, all of the effects and layers of this layer will be transferred alongside it into that new composition. So let me show you the difference. Let me put, for example, a color effect. Say something like, I don't know, color balance. I don't even have to do anything on top of it. Okay, so this is an effect. Okay, if I pre-compose this and leave all attributes in Parallax midground and name it something like tree 1 anim green comp 1. I'm not going to name it that just for now. I'm going to name it something else later. Okay, hit OK. It's going to turn on the new composition as well. But if you go to Parallax midground, right now that layer has turned into tree 1 anim green composition. Okay, and as you can see, the color balance effect is still here. This time on top of that composition instead of the previous layer, but once you go to comp, as you can see, it has no effects. Okay, so let's get this action back and pre-compose it again, this time moving all the attributes. Now the color effect is here, and if we had any animation, it will be here. Any transformation animation, anything, okay, it will be here. But when you go look at the midground, as you can see, no effect whatsoever. Okay, so that is the difference. And obviously, since you cannot transfer all of the effects and distinct and individual transformation properties of multiple layers into a single composition, once you select all of them and hit pre-compose, the only option to select here is moving all attributes into the new composition. Like all of these layers, whatever they had on them, will be coming with their effects into that new composition, will be put into that composition with their effects intact. Okay, so let's do exactly that. This is tree 1, all the layers for tree 1. Okay, so this is going to be precomp underscore tree 1. Okay, I like naming it this way. Okay, so here's the problem though. This is too big. This composition is inheriting all of the effects of the previous canvas as well. So I don't need this much space. So I'm going to go to my project file, sorry about that. And let's find a precomp tree. And while we're at it, let's create a new folder and call it precomps. Okay, and put these precomps inside Parallax effects. Okay, and put the precomp tree 1 here. Grouping everything is really important because naming everything is particularly important, so you can tell what is what. Okay, so I'm going to go to composition settings and try to find the size of this thing. Like if I turn on the rulers, Control R, or here Control R, you have to select the viewport first, same as Photoshop. I can immediately tell from the pixel dimension is like this is about 1000 pixels wide, and I don't know, about 700, 600 pixels tall. Let's see. Okay, composition size, this is going to be 1000 by, I don't know, 600 or something. Okay, and you can see the layer sizes obviously. So once I do something like this, I can immediately tell if anything is sticking out. Any one of these points is out of the canvas, that means you are creating a composition that is slightly smaller than in your original layers, which is not a good idea. Okay, so but this is good, we are happy with this. Okay, placement of everything, but since I changed the composition size, once I go back over here, then obviously placement of this object will change because the anchor point is retained. Anchor point is in the same spot, but I can easily place it back to where it was. Okay, and since this is going to be an instanced object, or at least that's the idea, like copying it, duplicating it, and positioning it inside the same parallax layer multiple times, since that's the idea, I mean, changing its position is not a problem for me at all. Okay, so with this out of the way, we can finally do an animation in here. Like if I go to precomp tree 1 and let me save my file, and if I select the anim green, I can now animate it. And there are multiple ways of animating objects. I mean, you can obviously, let's delete the color balance too, we don't need it. If I go to its scale rotation, I can, wobble it around using transform functions. But what better way to do this than using warp? Now we have Bezier and mesh warp options, and let me show you what they do. If I, for example, select Bezier warp and place it on top of it, it's going to give me this grid, this cage with multiple points, each of them animatable. This is okay in some parts, but it's a very archaic, very old school method of animating stuff, and it's not fast. It is too fiddly, so I don't like it. Mesh warp gives you more advantage because instead of saving every point as a discrete item, it just saves the distortion mesh entirely. And as you can see, you can decide how many rows and columns, or in Maya's terms, for example, subdivisions you want in this cage. But then again, you still have to fiddle with every single one of these points individually, which is not fun at all. So not going to use mesh warp as well. Now warp does something very similar to how text effects in Photoshop work. So if I go into Photoshop, I can maybe explain what the hell is going on. So if I create a text like this, okay, I can create a warp text. You can see arc does this, and arc lower does that, and bulge does this, whatever, okay? So these text effects, similar idea for warp over here. Arc lower, upper, bulge, everything, okay? But you can do this for actual images very easily. And sometimes this is very useful, especially for animating organic objects in seemingly random patterns, okay? So if I select, for example, flag, and let me turn off every single one of them so you can clearly see the difference. And I'm going to, not use bend, and maybe do this, and probably, yeah, use a little bit of bend, okay? And do something like this, okay? And maybe do the same for bend as well at the same time. So what you can do here is basically hit the stopwatch sign and animate them keyframe by keyframe, or there's a better option. Did you know, so let's turn these off, okay? You can use an After Effects expression for animating stuff continuously. So that is called wiggle. And wiggle is going to do something very funky, and you have to type it in. After all, it's an expression, but it's very easy. So once again, Alt-click the stopwatch sign, and instead of effect warp, okay, something like this, type in wiggle, and as you can see, it automatically suggests wiggle, right? And in wiggle, you have to define two values separated by a comma. And that is how many times a change will occur in 1 second, okay? And how big is that change going to be in either direction. So for example, I want to change the bend value of this effect 3 times every second. So I'm going to hit 3, comma, by how much? Maximum. This is going to be a random value, but I'm going to give it the maximum amount. Let's say 15. Okay, so that's it. Now After Effects is randomly changing this bend value between -15 and +15 3 times every second. Let's watch. Okay, a 15 seems to be a huge number, so let's make it something like 7. It's still a bit much. Let's keep it down to a respectable 5. And I'm going to do the same for this as well, okay? Alt-click, same, wiggle. And I'm going to keep things interesting, and instead of changing everything like 3 times for a second, I'm going to change it 4 times a second by 4, okay? Or maybe 2 times a second, maximum 8, okay? this is too much. Maybe this should be okay. Not bad. I mean, it looks weird, but once you turn back on these layers, and now watch. I mean, yeah, it's a little janky right now, but with fine tuning it could be great. I'm not going to spend so much time on it because I want to look into other stuff as well. Okay, so we have done the tree. We are happy with it. Let's do the same for the other tree as well. So now our tree inside this composition is being animated over here. So that's the good thing about pre-composing stuff. Whatever I did here as a composition, animation, anything, will be inherited here as well. Okay? Think of it like rendering out a movie in After Effects and putting it inside your project again. Okay? Same idea, only it's dynamic. Once I make changes over here, it's going to be reflected on here as well, in here as well. Okay, so let's do the same for tree 2. Precompose, precomp underscore tree 2. Okay, oh, obviously, since we have selected multiple layers, we are moving all attributes into the new composition. Let's go to project. Okay, put this parallax precomp tree 2 inside the precomp folder. Okay, once again, we have to resize everything. Let me turn on this area right here, about, I don't know, this is slightly bigger, like 1100 by 700. Let's see, composition settings. If it's not big enough, we can always resize it, you know. And let's put these, and obviously, yeah, they're sticking out. The size isn't enough, so I'm going to just type in like 800. Otherwise, all elements are inside. Seems so, okay? And since we don't have an animated green layer over here, I'm just going to go back here, copy this, Control C, come over here, Control V, and put it inside here, reposition it, and maybe even increase its size a bit. Okay, let's see. And it's really important that this doesn't stick out, right? If this sticks out, once you go into midground, here it will stick out too, right? Because that is the limits of that composition. That is the canvas size of that composition. You cannot go beyond it. Okay, so be careful. Okay, make sure it doesn't stick out. But over here is really good, and comes with the same wiggle effect. Okay, maybe slightly bigger as well. Make sure no part of it ever goes outside the canvas or the frame or the composition itself. Okay, good. Let's go to midground. All right. Now the good thing about this is I can simply make copies of these, okay, and position them individually. And obviously I can also scale them, put one over the other, stuff like this. Okay, so scale, for example, make this slightly bigger. This one, make this slightly smaller, and behind the other one, even perhaps smaller in the background. Right, maybe this one should be way front, this one should be slightly small and in the back. And I can even do things like flip them around, right? The same idea. For example, let's select this one, go to its scale, okay, and break the link, because I'm going to make one of these values, the horizontal value, minus 100, and it will obviously automatically flip it, mirror it. Okay, so relink them again, so I can keep the ratio between them the same. Okay, so that's the idea. You can now copy multiple objects and use them as instances. Now, and any changes I make to either of these precomps will be reflected on all of these objects inside the composition. Okay, so same idea as using blocks or instanced objects. Okay, so we can do the same for bush base and bush shadow as well. These funky little objects, like precompose them, precomp bush. Okay, open the new composition. It's obviously super large, but once you check out the size, it's like, I don't know, 100 pixels, 150 pixels, about the same. Okay, so let's pre-comp, change its location, composition settings. This will be 100 by 100. Okay, it's obviously too small right now, I can see that. Alright, so let's change the size again. About 150 by 150 is good, I believe. Still not okay. Okay, height 200. Alright, much better. Alright, now I want to animate this part over here, and maybe I can use something like a wave warp. Okay, and wave warp basically, like, let's turn this off. It is already animated. You don't have to even wiggle it or anything. Okay, it's going to come with its own animation. It's going to do something like this. Basically, it's going to use a sine wave, a square wave, whatever a square wave is, something like this, obviously, right? And if this doesn't make sense to you, like what the hell is a square wave, what the hell is a sine wave, you can always check it out. Like, let's go to Google, sine wave. Here's a sine wave, and here's a square wave, basically, right? These are all mathematical realities, and using those mathematical realities we can animate stuff. So what's the good thing about this is that you can change its size, some like this, and this is a bit too, you know, funky, and wave speed is too much, so let's halve it. Okay, let's change the wave width to something much larger and the wave height to something much smaller, and let's see what's happening. Oh, much better, right? And you can even stack these effects. Like if I go to wave warp again and put it under here, it's going to put a second one. Okay, once the calculation for the first wave warp is finished, the other one will begin. So now I can do stuff like, I don't know, wave height low, this is very low, let's keep this even shorter, and this one, as you can see, I am incorporating randomness in the other direction. Okay, so it's a bit, looks a bit more natural. Okay, you can do stuff like this, and let's turn on the bush shadow as well. Okay, and you can obviously animate the shadow because this thing is moving, so should the shadow, but forget it now. Okay, so once I put it over here, now I can make copies of this bush, put it over here, scale it down in the background, grab this bush, put it over here, I don't know, scale it some here as well, and let's put it over here, and scale it some more. Okay, so this is how pre-comping works in essence. And the best thing about this is, let's save it, when we go back to main comp parallax, there we go. Okay, the background element or the midground element that we have edited has its animation on top of it. Like, it's very hard to see right now, but you get the idea. And one final thing before all of that is that you can even, if you work with layers, you can even separate them later into different elements. So check out parallax background. So we have a reference layer here. Let's forget about it. I'm going to delete it. But look at the forest, mountain details, mountains, right? These elements are all, disableable. I can always disable them. Or I can put them inside another composition and not nested in here, but completely separated into a different object. So right now, this parallax background is all and good, but the moon, which is supposed to be millions of kilometers away from us, once you look at the animation, behaves like a background object. It is very obvious. So what I want to do here is use the sky itself as a single object far in the background, never moving, a two-dimensional object, but still consider mountains as movable objects or as parallaxing objects, okay? So in order to do that, I'm going to go into my project folder and just make a duplicate of the parallax background. Control C and V will do it. And I'm going to rename this as sky, okay? Well, let's name it parallax sky. It's not going to parallax, but it's part of the same set, right? So let's put it inside here. What I'm going to do is, in the parallax sky, I'm going to delete mountains and all the related objects like the forest and the details, okay? And in the background, I'm going to delete the clouds and all the related objects, the moon and everything. All right? So in practice, I have separated these things into two separate elements. So if I go to main comp parallax, now this, obviously the sky background is gone, so I have to bring in parallax sky once again, but this time I'm not going to make this object into a three-dimensional layer. It's always appear in the background. It's always going to appear in the background. So check it out. I can even push the background further back so it travels even less. Okay, something like this. And also, as you can see, as you remember, we have increased the size, or we have increased the time limit of our compositions to 20 seconds, but these things are still at 10 seconds over here, but I have 20 seconds of space, so I can extend these layers all the way to their real limits, okay? Be careful about this, right? So let's watch. Okay, maybe this thing, midground 2, should be a bit more backwards. Oh, not this one. Something like this. You get the idea. All right? That's about it, really. This is pre-comping. You get objects, you put them inside their dedicated compositions, then use those compositions as separate layers. And this is the same technique you're going to use over and over again in your character animations as well, because that's the only way you can control different objects in composition space. Okay, so hopefully that helps. Good luck. See you next time.